A single, rhythmic tapping echoed through the whiteout. A desperate Morse code plea for help buried beneath the drifting snow. Officer Ramirez tightened his grip on Shadow's harness. The K-9's ears pricked forward as each tap reverberated. In the still air, context and danger converged in that frozen wilderness, a remote stretch of mountain where winter storms could swallow entire search teams without warning. Adversity blossomed in the form of an unseen survivor, stranded and silent, fighting the cold that crept into bone and spirit alike. Yet within that relentless storm, a flicker of hope pulsed through the pattern, an unspoken promise that if Ramirez and Shadow could decipher its message, they might still rewrite the outcome. Officer Daniel Ramirez inhaled the icy air as he stepped from the snowcat, boots crunching on the unbroken drifts. He surveyed the desolate expanse of the Crestwood Ridge, a place where even seasoned hikers faltered under winter's grip. Beside him, Shadow's sleek, black coat swallowed the pale light, and the German shepherd's breath curled like smoke in the frigid dawn. For Ramirez, this was more than another out, it was a crucible that would test the bond he had forged with the dog after years of shared missions and silent understanding. Every rescue had its stakes, but this one felt different. The radio crackled with static, the faint Morse-style tapping seeping through like a ghost in the snow. No coordinates, no visible beacon. Just that persistent signal, an SOS, in 3 short bursts, 3 long, 3 short again. Repeating without fail. Ramirez knelt beside Shadow, ran a gloved hand along the dog's collar, and recalled their first deployment together 5 years prior. He remembered Shadow as a gangly pup, uncertain and hesitant amid chaos, and how he had coaxed the young dog toward confidence with a gentle touch and unwavering patience. Through after-action debriefs and long nights at the station, they had become a unit, 2 halves of a single, purpose-driven team. Ramirez's mind drifted to the faces of those they had saved. A stranded climber clinging to an ice shelf in a gale, a lost child shivering on a forest trail at dusk. In each success, Shadow's instincts had guided them. In each failure, Ramirez had carried the weight of what might have been. As the wind picked up, swirling powder around their legs, Shadow's ears twitched. Ramirez rose, scanning the horizon for any sign of the source. The mountains loomed like fractured ice, steep gullies carved by avalanches long past. He checked his wrist console. Battery life dwindling, GPS flickering. Base Command had authorized only a limited window before conditions deteriorated further. Yet the SOS persisted, a stubborn ember of life amid the frozen ruins. He keyed the mic, his voice low. Shadow and Ramirez, moving in on signal. Winds gusting to 38. A flashback struck him, then midnight, 2 winters ago. Aboard a similar ridge where he had lost his partner, Officer Meyer, to a sudden ice collapse that swallowed them both. Shadow had barked until Ramirez dragged himself free, the dog's frantic paws tearing through the snow. Meyer never made it back, and Ramirez vowed he would never again face that helplessness. The memory sharpened his focus. This time, there would be no mistakes. Shadow's nose swept low, and in that gesture, Ramirez found his compass. Carefully, he traced the incline where the tapping grew stronger, each footstep battling the drifting crust. The officer recalled basic survival training. Conserve energy, maintain contact, read the terrain. Yet here, every rule bowed before the urgency of human life in peril. He adjusted his goggles, felt the sting of wind in his eyes, and pressed on. Beyond the swirling veil, shapes began to emerge, brittle pines bowed under heavy snow. Rocky outcrops sprouting like jagged teeth. The tapping, once faint, now thrummed in his chest. Ramirez called softly, "Easy, boy," and Shadow matched his pace, muscles coiled. The storm's roar became a distant soundtrack to the pounding in Ramirez's head. He thought of the family, waiting at base, parents who had filed the missing person report. When their daughter failed to return from an early winter trek, he thought of the stretch of silent hours that must have passed since she fell into this icy trap. The air grew denser, each inhale a struggle. Then, as if cutting through a veil, the tapping sounded distinct, yet muffled under fresh drifts. Ramirez stopped. Shadow wind and pawed at the snow, chestnut eyes bright in the gloom. Ramirez crouched, placing his hand beside the dog's cold fur, feeling the cadence against his fingertips. The signal was a regular now hesitation between bursts, a breath-like pause that spoke of exhaustion. Whoever lay beneath this frozen blanket was fighting, not just cold, but the crushing weight of isolation. Officer Ramirez rose, voice steady despite the tremor in his soul. "All right, partner, let's get her out." Shadow responded with a soft bark, and together they leaned into the storm, two forms moving as one toward the faint heartbeat of hope buried in the snow. Officer Ramirez eased Shadow onto the slope's gentler grade, the canine's nimble paws cutting through the drifts, as if searching for a hidden path. The rhythmic tapping had faded to a faint memory, yet its urgency lingered in both their minds. As they paused behind a snow-laden boulder, Ramirez allowed himself a moment to reflect on how he and Shadow had arrived at this crucible. His breath formed delicate clouds, each exhalation a reminder that time was slipping away for the stranded hiker. 5 years earlier, a young Sergeant Ramirez had arrived at the academy eager to make a difference but unsure of his role. He had volunteered for the K-9 unit on a whim, drawn by the stories of canine heroes who bridged the gap between human frailty and nature's indifference. Shadow, then a spirited 8-month-old puppy named Raven in the kennels, caught Ramirez's eye with his bright, inquisitive gaze. The trainers warned Ramirez that pairing with an untested dog could be a liability, but he persisted, driven by a conviction that empathy and consistency could forge a miracle. Ramirez remembered their earliest drills, basic obedience exercises, in controlled fields, long hikes through dense forests with false alerts scattered like brittle leaves. Shadow had stumbled at first, hesitated at the scent of decaying brush, barked at phantom noises in the undergrowth, yet each mistake had been a lesson, each success a spark that ignited the bond between man and dog. Ramirez would sit beside Shadow after the drills, praising him in low tones, offering a hand to steady the puppy's trembling frame. Slowly, the dog's initial wariness gave way to fervent loyalty. Their first live rescue was a harbinger of what lay ahead. A teenage boy had broken away from a scout group to chase a rabbit, only to become disoriented as dusk fell. Ramirez and Shadow had navigated a maze of pines by scent alone. Shadow's ears pricked as he traced the boy's crushed soda can to a shallow ravine. As Ramirez called the boy's name and the child emerged, face streaked with tears and soot, the boy had collapsed against Shadow's flank. It was that image, small arms wrapped around broad shoulders, that sealed Ramirez's faith in the canine partnership. Now, in the biting cold of Crestwood Ridge, those memories fueled his resolve. He thought of the missing hiker as more than a call sign. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend. Base had identified her as Emily Nolan, a graduate student whose research on alpine fungi had taken her off the beaten path. Her last transmission, an excited report of an undiscovered shelf mushroom, had been cut short by a sudden blizzard. No sooner had she noted the strange spore patterns had the storm rolled in, burying her under snowdrifts and panic. Ramirez checked his gear, a compact sonar probe, thermal flares, and enough emergency rations to last 2 more hours. He recalled Emily's dossier, a bright young scientist driven by curiosity, described as resourceful yet inexperienced in extreme winter conditions. Her lab mates feared she had fallen into a hidden crevasse or suffered a medical emergency. Ramirez's radio crackled with updates from the base, but their voices sounded hollow against the wind's howl. Shadow pressed close, and Ramirez slid a hand into the dog's harness. Feeling the reassuring curve of reinforced nylon beneath his glove, an internal voice whispered doubts. Had he miscalculated the timeline? Were they chasing echoes in the snow? The whisper grew as he remembered Officer Meyer's last words, delivered just before the ridge collapsed beneath their feet. "Trust the dog," Meyer had said, voice strained. Ramirez had listened then, yet fate had torn Meyer away. Now, Shadow stood as both reminder and guide of that promise, to honor the fallen partner by saving another life. Shadow's tail gave a subtle wag. Ramirez exhaled, steeling his nerves against the storm's assault. He tapped a command on his wrist console and activated the sonar probe. A faint heat signature appeared, a tiny warm spot buried 3 feet beneath the drift. The contours of a human form flickered in the device's glow. A surge of relief, tempered by urgency, pulsed through Ramirez's veins. This was no phantom signal. Beneath that frozen veil lay flesh and breath. He crouched beside Shadow, murmuring, "Here we go, partner." The dog's eyes locked onto Ramirez's, brimming with the quiet understanding that had saved lives before. Ramirez reflected on the metaphor woven into their partnership, man and dog, each compensating for the other's weaknesses. Where, he faltered with equipment and technology, Shadow excelled with nose and instinct. Where Shadow lacked human empathy, Ramirez provided the hand to comfort a survivor. Together, they were more than a team, they were a lifeline in the wilderness. With renewed determination, Ramirez planted the probe's tip and began clearing the snow, shovel biting into the drift as Shadow scraped with urgent paws. Each shovelful revealed a bit more of Emily's bright yellow parka. A flash of auburn hair, eyelids fluttering beneath frost. Ramirez's breath caught as he brushed snow from her cheek, whispering reassurance as if she could hear him beneath the layers of panic. Even as he worked, his mind parsed the broader picture: Emily's limited experience in avalanches. The sudden meteorological shift that turned her routine fieldwork into a fight for survival. He marveled at her resilience, how she had managed to tap out an SOS, her fingers numb, her resolve stronger than the storm that threatened to silence her. That signal, once a cryptic pulse in the wind, had blossomed into a clear call for help that only Shadow's acute hearing could trace. As the final barrier of ice and snow gave way, Ramirez prepared to lift Emily free, aware that the next moments would test every lesson he and Shadow had learned together. In the heart of a merciless blizzard, a young scientist clings to life beneath frozen drifts context. Her dwindling warmth whispers of approaching frostbite and isolation adversity. Yet the bond of a steadfast officer and his canine partner promises a daring rescue just beyond the snow's hold resolution. The wind's howl grew into a roar as Officer Ramirez and Shadow pressed deeper into the storm's heart. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The world outside seemed to dissolve into a churn of white. Ramirez's gut tightened as he struggled to recalibrate his bearings. The compass needle spun wildly under magnetic interference, and his GPS flickered with indecipherable coordinates. Each misstep risked a plunge into an unseen crevasse. Shadow, normally confident, hesitated at a ridge's edge, ears flat against his skull. Ramirez froze, heart pounding, and gently coaxed the dog forward. He reminded himself of every training scenario: navigate by scent, move as one, but the storm was rewriting the rules in real time. Snow piled on Ramirez's shoulders, a silent weight that threatened to pin him in place. He fought against the urge to stop and dig in for shelter. The tapping signal had all but vanished, replaced by the storm's relentless clamor. He angled, his headlamp downward, scanning the ground for paw prints or glint of the hiker's bright gear. Instead, his beam caught a flash of metal, snapped snow probe blade half buried 6 inches below. Panic flickered. Without the probe, how would he pinpoint precise locations beneath drifts? He reached to replace the damaged tool, only to discover the spare probe lodged deep in his pack under a tangle of ropes. His fingers numbed as he fumbled the zipper. A surge of frustration flared, igniting memories of past failures. The time he and Meyer had misread a thermal reading and lost precious hours chasing a phantom signal. The chill of the morgue cooler, the hushed apology on dispatch. Ramirez shook off the ghosts. Shadow pressed against his leg, a living reminder that their partnership could conquer this chaos. He exhaled, folding away regret, and dug the spare probe free. Each movement felt like wading through snow's grip, unyielding, the cold seeping through every layer of insulation. Recalibrating the probe, Ramirez tapped his wrist console for a sonar sweep. The device sputtered, then delivered a faint echo, a hollow tone that spoke of an open cavity beneath the snow. Relief wrestled with dread. The hollow could be a collapsed tunnel or a collapsed lung. He knelt, voice low. "Here, boy." Shadow sniffed the air, then began to paw and scrape with renewed urgency. Snow exploded in white spray as Ramirez laid hands to work, his breath ragged. Every shovelful revealed only more frozen powder. The storm's white curtain occasionally parted, revealing steep slopes carved by past avalanches. It was a cruel reminder that the mountain itself was alive, capricious, and lethal. Then came the thunderous crack, the sound of ice fracturing under immense pressure. Ramirez tensed, helmet clinking as he looked up to see a cornice above him, shifting, sending a cascade of snow toward their position. "Move," he barked, grabbing Shadow's harness and pulling him backward. Together, they plunged downhill, sliding on their sides as the avalanche thundered past, snow exploding around them in a malevolent fury. When the debris settled, Ramirez lay prone, ears ringing, heart hammering. Shadow licked his face, eyes bright but unscathed. Ramirez hugged the dog, voice quavering. "You okay, partner?" Shadow responded with a soft huff, tail wagging once. "Steady." They regrouped under a rocky overhang, the storm's rage muffled to a deafening whisper. Ramirez checked Shadow's paws. No cuts, no frostbite, then scanned himself. Scrapes and bruises, but nothing life-threatening. The dog's calm presence grounded him. Ramirez pressed a thermal flare into Shadow's vest pouch. The glow would offer a beacon if their next move went awry. He spoke aloud to himself, a mantra chiseled from determination. "For Emily. For Meyer's memory. For each life counted on us." Shadow leaned into his hand, a trembling reassurance. As Ramirez surveyed the shattered slope, the tapping returned, a distorted pulse carried on the wind. It was weaker now, almost drowned by the storm, but unmistakable. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. It fought against the gale, a fragile heartbeat in the maw of chaos. Ramirez rose, muscles burning, and clicked his radio. Signal regained. Location uncertain, but it's close. Moving out, he slung his pack, adjusted Shadow's gear, and took a final glance at the avalanche path, a stark scar across the ridge. Every step from here on would carry them closer to the edge of hope itself. Hidden beneath the mountain's wrath, a buried plea struggles to break through the white fury context. Equipment failures and a sudden avalanche threatened to bury both rescuer and victim alike. Adversity, yet Shadow's unwavering instinct and a returning S.O.S. pulse promise a path forward through the storm's heart. Resolution. Officer Ramirez settled against the rocky recess. Shadow's warm body pressed close as wind-whipped snow rattled around them. In that fragile moment of reprieve, his mind drifted into the chasm between duty and self. Every rescue carried weight, but this one pressed deeper into his soul. He thought of Emily Nolan, her scientific curiosity. The light in her eyes when she first reported an undiscovered mushroom shelf. Was she terrified beneath the snow, her intellect betraying her by calculating frostbite timelines even as her body froze? He shuddered at the thought and squeezed Shadow's harness, drawing strength from the dog's steady presence. Memories of his former partner, Officer Meyer, rose like phantoms. He recalled Meyer's easy laughter on long nights in the barracks, how they'd shared dreams of making the world safer, one mission at a time. Then the ridge had collapsed, and Meyer had vanished beneath ice. Ramirez had screamed until his lungs burned, Shadow barking until dawn, but there had been no rescue that night. Guilt had become his shadow and ever-present reminder of failure. In the weeks that followed, he had considered leaving the force, convinced that his instincts had betrayed him. But Shadow Mind too had nudged him back to purpose, a four-legged compass guiding him through grief. Now, pressed against this icy wall, Ramirez felt that old guilt resurface. What if Emily's fate mirrored Meyer's? What if Shadow's keen nose led him to another tragedy? Anxiety knotted his chest, and every breath tasted of fear. He rubbed his gloved hands together, visualizing all the ways this mission could go wrong. A second avalanche, hidden crevasses swallowing them whole, or Emily's strength finally extinguished before they could reach her. The dog's soft exhalation reminded him that panic would only cloud his judgment. Ramirez closed his eyes, summoning a memory of Meyer's final words, "Trust the dog." 3 simple words that had steered him through every operation since he exhaled, aligning his heartbeat with Shadow's steady rhythm. In that unity, he found a reservoir of calm. Shadow's amber eyes met his, and in their depths shimmered the same resolve he had nurtured in the puppy years ago. No hesitation. No fear. Only purpose. Beneath the psychological storm, Ramirez excavated empathy for Emily's plight. He imagined her alone in the dark, desperation sharpening every sensation, the howling wind, the crushing weight of snow, the relentless sting of cold. He thought of his own daughter's laughter, ringing through their home as she chased their cat down the hallway, oblivious to danger. What if that had been Emily's family waiting at base, each tick of the clock echoing like a death knell? That thought ignited determination, transforming anxiety into resolve. He dug into his memory of past rescues for technique and reassurance. In every successful mission, he had combined science and instinct, triangulating signals, reading subtle signs in snow patterns, calibrating equipment with precision. But it was the human element, empathy, patience, unwavering belief that had carried them through the bleakest moments. Shadow provided the instinct. Ramirez supplied the heart. Together, they had become a single entity, capable of bridging the gulf between life and oblivion. A sudden gust rattled the overhang, and Ramirez opened his eyes to where Shadow sat, ears pricked, nose quivering. The dog had picked up new movement. Beneath the drift, barely perceptible shifts that spoke of Emily's trembling efforts to stay conscious, Ramirez felt his pulse quicken. He placed a steadying hand on Shadow's flank and murmured, "Let's finish this." Inhaling sharply, he rose, steeling his nerves against the storm's fury. Shadow sprang to his feet, tail low but stiff with purpose. Ramirez's heart thudded not with fear, but with fierce compassion. He was not just an officer executing a protocol. He was a human reaching across the void to save another. The burden of past failures and future uncertainties dissolved in the clarity of this moment. A life hung in the balance. And he held the key, amid the storm's psychological onslaught. Haunted by memories of past lost context, Ramirez confronts waves of guilt and anxiety as he braces to rescue Emily. Adversity, yet an unbreakable bond with Shadow and profound empathy forge his unwavering commitment to save her. Resolution amid the storm's psychological onslaught. Haunted by memories of past lost context, Ramirez confronts waves of guilt and anxiety as he braces to rescue Emily. Adversity, yet an unbreakable bond with Shadow and profound empathy forge his unwavering commitment to save her. Resolution. Ramirez's gloved hands worked swiftly as Shadow pawed away the last thin layer of ice crust. Suddenly, metal gleamed beneath the snow, a small, rectangular distress beacon, its antenna bent but intact. Ramirez pried it free and flipped the switch. A green light blinked weakly, and relief flooded him as the device hummed to life. Shadow pressed close, tail wagging in muted excitement. Ramirez keyed his radio with trembling fingers. "Base, this is Ramirez. I've located the distress beacon, receiving a faint life sign. Request immediate extraction coordinates." His voice echoed oddly through the headset, the static cutting in and out. He pressed on. "Subject appears conscious. Thermal reading indicates elevated heart rate. Coordinates coming, stand by." For a moment, the storm's howl seemed to recede, replaced by the comforting certainty of human connection. Through the crackle, a familiar voice responded. "Copy, Ramirez. Hang tight. Extraction team en route, ETA, 10 minutes. The promise of backup warmed Ramirez's spirit more than the emergency rations in his pack. He exchanged a look with Shadow, 2 partners poised on the brink of success. Shadow's ears pricked toward a distant ridge, as if sensing more than the beacon could convey. Ramirez followed the dog's gaze and noticed a glimmer of color nearby, a red fly rod poking through the snow. The same pattern of half-buried footprints led toward a shallow depression. Heart pounding, Ramirez lifted the beacon and followed Shadow's lead. The dog's nose brushed against fresh drifts, guiding Ramirez step by step at the edge of a small hollow. Ramirez spotted the hiker's face, Emily Nolan, eyes fluttering beneath frost. Her breath came in ragged puffs, each exhale a visible wisp in the cold air. Relief and gratitude washed over Ramirez as he knelt beside her. "Emily, I'm Officer Ramirez," he said softly. "You're safe now. Shadow and I have you." His voice carried a gentleness that belied the adrenaline coursing through him. Shadow leaned in, nuzzling Emily's arm. She managed a faint smile, fingers brushing the dog's fur. Ramirez reached into his pack, offering a heat blanket and a sip of water. Emily's gratitude shone through her weary expression. "Thank you," she whispered, voice weak but steady. The beacon's green light pulsed like a heartbeat, a symbol of renewed hope. But as Ramirez lifted the device to check its signal strength, the light flickered and died. Silence swallowed them. Ramirez's chest tightened as the radio went dead, the lifeline to base severed by the storm's fury. Emily's eyelids fluttered with confusion and fear, her strength ebbing. Shadow whined softly, pressing his muzzled nose against Ramirez's hand. Ramirez's mind raced. 10 minutes had become an unknown. The storm could shift again at any moment, and without communication, they were on their own. He took a steadying breath, recalling every training drill on emergency protocols. He toggled the beacon switch, but the green light remained dark. Equipment failure had struck at the very moment hope seemed assured. He squeezed Shadow's harness and met the dog's eyes. In that shared gaze, he found the resolve to push forward. "All right, partner," Ramirez murmured. "Let's improvise." He lifted Emily gently, securing her in a makeshift harness fashioned from rope and webbing. Shadow took the lead, scenting the path back toward the ridge where extraction was likely to approach. Together, the trio set off into the storm, once more hope flickering fragilely beneath the roaring winds. Held aloft by the unwavering bond of an officer and his canine, has an animal ever guided you through a moment of uncertainty or danger? Share your unforgettable animal-inspired moment in the comments below. A restored beacon lights the promise of rescue context, then flickers out under the storm's wrath, plunging officer, dog, and survivor into renewed isolation. Adversity, yet their unbreakable unity and quick thinking forge a path forward. Through the snow's silent expanse. Resolution. Officer Ramirez leaned into the gale, each step a battle against driving snow that felt determined to erase their progress. With Emily secured between his arms in the improvised harness, and Shadow leading the way, every footfall sent tremors of uncertainty through Ramirez's exhausted limbs. He fought the urge to rush. One misstep could send them tumbling into hidden snow bridges, or worse, another avalanche. Yet the storm's fury offered no quarter-wind gusts threatened to wrench Emily from his grasp, and snowdrifts rose like walls on either side of their narrow path. Shadow's paws crunched ahead, halting at the crest of a small rise. Ramirez crouched, pressing his back against the biting wind, and peered over. His heart sank at the sight. A deeper gully cutting across their route, its edges jagged with ice, too wide to cross without aid. Beyond it lay a steeper incline where extraction teams were most likely to arrive. The only bridge was a fallen pine, half-buried and unstable. Ramirez assessed the makeshift crossing, counting the seconds it took for gale force wind to nearly sweep Shadow off his feet. A surge of adrenaline propelled Ramirez forward. He set Emily gently on the snow, careful to keep pressure off her shivering body. Shadow pressed close, ears flattened, as Ramirez tested the fallen trunk. It creaked ominously under his weight. Each careful step strained the ancient wood. Ramirez channeled every memory of balance drills, lowering his center of gravity and moving with deliberate slowness. Halfway across, a crack split the air as the trunk shifted. His breath caught, but he swallowed panic and froze, willing it to hold. Shadow hesitated but then inched forward, trusting the same instinct. Ramirez exhaled slowly and edged to safety, Emily cradled against his chest. Reaching the opposite edge, Ramirez felt hope bloom, only to be met with fresh adversity. Emily's breathing had grown more labored, and her eyelids lay heavy with hypothermia's grip. Ramirez pressed a hand to her forehead, icy cold, and realized their pace must quicken to stave off her decline. Yet the path ahead twisted into a narrow chute carved by past avalanches, where loose snow threatened to undermine every step. Shadow paused at the chute's entrance, gaze fixed on the swirling winds funneling through. Forearm whispered words of assurance he barely felt, and nodded to Shadow. The dog stepped forward first, forging a path with firm paws. Ramirez followed, boots crunching in the compacted snow, as gusts buffeted them from both sides. He imagined the faces at Emily's family waiting for any news, and drew strength from the knowledge that every second counted. As the chute narrowed, the roar of the wind intensified, and Ramirez felt the familiar burn of fatigue sear his muscles. Yet with Shadow's unwavering lead and Emily's fragile life hanging in the balance, he forced one step after another toward the ridge where salvation waited. An improvised crossing over a trembling ice bridge tests resolve context, while hypothermia tightens its grip and a narrowing chute threatens entombment, adversity. Yet the officer's steady courage and his K9's fearless pathfinding carve a route toward deliverance. Resolution. Every blast of wind felt like a hammer blow as Officer Ramirez, Shadow, and Emily edged closer to the ridge. The narrow chute emptied onto a jagged promontory where the storm's fury was at its peak. Ramirez steadied himself against a gnarled pine, scanning the swirling whiteness for any sign of movement. Below, crevices yawned like hungry mouths, while above, the sky pressed down with a weight that threatened to crush them. Shadow pressed his flank against Ramirez's leg, as if sharing an unspoken warning. The final push would demand everything they had. Ramirez tightened the straps of his improvised harness around Emily's shoulders and tucked her chin gently against his chest. Her breathing was shallow, each exhale a fragile plume in the maelstrom. He whispered her name, willing her to stay with them. Shadow lifted his nose to the wind, then dropped it to the snow, guiding Ramirez toward a narrow ledge carved by past rescues. The path was barely wide enough for one set of footprints, and an unseen slip now could send them tumbling into oblivion, but with Shadow in the lead. Ramirez followed step by painstaking step, every sense honed to the moment. The gale threatened to rip Emily from his grip. He braced himself against the rock face and leaned into the wind, using the ridge's bulwark to shield them. Shadow stopped at the ledge's end and barked, once sharp, insistent. Across a 10-foot gap lay a fallen support beam from an old observation post, half buried and slick with ice. Ramirez assessed it. Unstable, but their only route. He shifted Emily higher on his chest, tested the beam with one boot, and felt it groan. Heart-pounding, he edged onto the beam. It swayed under his weight, and snow sprayed down into the abyss. Shadow moved beside him, careful not to break the fragile balance. Inch by trembling inch, Ramirez carried Emily across, muscles burning, rain of ice pellets stinging his face. Halfway through, the beam cracked. He froze, mind racing through every contingency. Then Shadow nudged the beam with his snout, stabilizing it as if offering his own strength. Renewed by the dog's courage, Ramirez summoned his last reserves of will. Stepped off the beam, and onto solid ground. Looking back, the chasm gaped like a wound between them and safety. Ahead, the ridge leveled out into a plateau dusted with Ramirez pressed Emily to his side, wiping snow from her eyelashes, and met Shadow's gaze. In that instant, he knew the climax was near and that their unity had carried them this far. On the razor's edge of a frozen abyss context, a perilous crossing over a fragile beam threatens to shatter their rescue adversity, yet Shadow's unwavering trust and Ramirez's steadfast determination push them onto the brink of salvation resolution. The plateau's hush greeted them like a benediction, as Ramirez spotted the distant flash of rescue lights. Shadow's ears pricked, tail wagging in relief, as he guided Ramirez and Emily toward the glow. Ramirez's legs trembled with exhaustion, but adrenaline surged as he called out, "Here over here." Two medics in bright orange suits plunged through the drifts, hauling a stretcher and a portable heat tent. Ramirez knelt beside Emily, gently disentangling the makeshift harness and lowering her onto the waiting stretcher. Her eyes fluttered open, focus clearing as she recognized the circle of concerned faces around her. Shadow pressed his muzzle against her hand, offering one last nuzzle before the medic gently lifted him back. Ramirez exchanged a weary smile with the lead paramedic, who hooked Emily's foreline and draped a thermal blanket over her shoulders. The beacon's final glow winked off as Emily's temperature stabilized, her lips quivering into a grateful smile. Shadow reclined against Ramirez's leg, alert but calm, as the helicopter's thump vibrated through the snow. Ramirez gave Shadow a firm pat and whispered, "We did it, partner." The dog responded with a soft bark, eyes shining in the dawn's pale light as the helicopter lifted. Ramirez watched Emily safe in the medevac harness, Shadow's nose pressed to the glass. A profound relief coursed through him this time. There had been no loss. In the aftermath, Ramirez felt the full weight of their journey, the storm's fury, the past that haunted him, and the promise they had fulfilled. Side by side, Officer and K9 stood on the ridge, silent witnesses to hope's triumph over the snow's silent grip. Amid the storm's final roar, a unified front of rescue teams and canine instinct converges on safety context. Frostbite's threat and deep exhaustion loom as the helicopter's arrival hangs in uncertainty, adversity. Yet the survivors, grateful eyes and Shadow's steadfast loyalty affirm that hope, courage, and partnership can conquer even the harshest whiteout resolution. Officer Ramirez stood on the ridge as dawn's pale light softened the landscape, Shadow at his side, ears alert yet calm. In the quiet aftermath, Ramirez allowed himself to feel the full magnitude of what they had achieved. A life reclaimed from the white abyss. A promise kept to both fallen and saved. He reflected on the bond that transcended words, a silent covenant of trust born in training fields and tested in the storm's fury. Shadow, once a hesitant pup, now moved with the assurance of a guardian spirit. His every breath a testament to loyalty's power. Ramirez thought of Emily Nolan's grateful eyes, the warmth of the rescue tent, and the unspoken understanding that this partnership saved more than a life. It renewed faith in compassion itself. Together, on that windswept crest, they proved that hope can be tapped from even the coldest silence. 150 words. How do you hope the bond between Officer Ramirez and Shadow continues to evolve after such a harrowing rescue? Share your thoughts below. In the aftermath's stillness, a silent camaraderie shines brighter than any beacon context. Even as the mountain's chill lingers on their skin adversity, yet the unbreakable human-canine bond rekindles faith in unwavering hope resolution. In the silent dawn, Ramirez and Shadow depart Crestwood Ridge, their footsteps a testament to empathy and unyielding courage. Their story echoes beyond this rescue, inspiring communities to honor the silent guardians among us. May every heart find resilience in unity, and may the legacy of K9 heroes endure always. In the legacy's aftermath, shifting challenges stir, hope context, doubts whisper against new horizons adversity. Yet the shared spirit of Ramirez and Shadow champions resilience and sparks courage in every heartbeat resolution.